Tonight we are in Galashiels, the second biggest town in the Scottish borders. Famed for its textile industry, it's twice been named the happiest place in Scotland. But is that how locals see it? Tonight we've been joined by people from across the area who've come to the Borders College looking for answers to their questions. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the show where you get to ask the big questions, answering them on our panel this evening. From the Scottish Conservatives, Whittle is MSP for South of Scotland, a former Olympic athlete. Brian was elected to Holyrood almost 10 years ago and is now the party spokesperson for public health, social care, mental well-being and sport. Alan Taylor was born in the Borders and recently moved back here. A journalist for more than 30 years, he was managing editor of The Scotsman and co-founder of the Scottish Review of Books. Also with us this evening, the Chief Executive of the Association of Scotland's Self-Caterers, Fiona Campbell. Recently voted CEO of the Year at the Scottish Women's Awards, Fiona represents thousands of holiday businesses right around Scotland. From Scottish Labour, Zubir Ahmed. Zubir is the Glasgow South West MP, Parliamentary Private Secretary to Wes Streeting. He was elected last year after almost 2 decades working in the NHS and is the first transplant surgeon to sit in Parliament. And finally, from the SNP, Emma Roddick is MSP for the Highlands and Islands. Emma was the youngest MSP elected in 2021 at the age of 23 and went on to become Minister for Equalities, Migration and Refugees, a post she held until May last year. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our audience here in Galashiels. It's great to be back with you in the Scottish Borders, and you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland tonight. BBC DN is the hashtag you need right now on social media to be part of the conversation, and our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Michael Needham. Michael, good evening.
Good evening, panel. Is reducing benefits a fair solution to help the UK economy?
Thank you, Michael. This week the government announced changes to the benefit system aimed at saving £5 billion a year. Zubir Ahmed, as a doctor, is this a tough medicine that Britain needs?
Well, there is a context and a principle to this, and it's about reform and about the status quo. Over the last 5 years, benefits and disability-related benefits in this country, in Scotland, and in the UK have risen by 50%. In Scotland, 1 in 6 people are economically inactive, greater than the United Kingdom. That is not a situation that can continue. The welfare state is built on the backs of working people, as is all of the public sector. And the number of people working and paying tax is reducing, and those claiming benefit is increasing. And the principle that we are going to adhere to when we do any reform of any public sector body is, one, that those who work should work. Those that want to work should be enabled and helped to work and not hindered. And those that cannot, and it is explicitly clear they cannot, should be removed from the system so they do not suffer the indignity of repeated assessments. And this is quite personal to me, this reform. I grew up in Glasgow in Govan Hill, one of the poorest areas in the country. My dad was a taxi driver. We lived in a tenement flat of 12 households. My dad was often the only person in an only household that had regular work coming in. At times, we had to, go on to incapacity benefit to bridge times where he was unwell. So I know the safety net that exists for people to get them back into work. But I also saw in my neighbours missed opportunities to get people back into work. The safety net that was there as a springboard became something they got entangled into. And this reform will make sure that never happens again. There will be an ability and a potential to try work without having your benefits threatened. There'll be £1 billion spent for bespoke solutions to people to help them get back into employment. And finally, I'll say this, as a professional, as a doctor, as a surgeon, during the Cameron years, the bad years of the ATOS clipboard assessments, I saw countless cases, heartbreaking cases, people having their benefits removed, coming to me and having to write letters of support, then winning their appeals. We will never let that happen again. We will bring dignity to people that need it. We will make sure those that cannot work should never be made to suffer in that way through repeated assessments.
Emma Roddick, do the Scottish Government accept there is a problem with welfare and benefits in this country?
There's a problem that's just been described in that there is an employment gap for disabled people who want to work but are not able to work. But there is absolutely no evidence from anyone anywhere that suggests taking money away from them that allows them to pay for carers, disability adjustments, mobility aids is the way to get them into work. The way to get them into work is to change work, to make sure that work pays, that work is accessible, that it is easy to exercise your employment rights and request flexible work and what you require in order to go to work and be productive. Taking money away from people who are disabled is not the answer.
This is more than just about disability, though. We have 1 in 6 young people in Scotland not in employment, training or education at the moment. It's 1 in 8 south of the border. Much worse figures than elsewhere in Europe. Why is that?
So we're doing a lot of work at the moment on apprenticeships. We've just had Scottish Apprenticeship Week and I got to hear from some young people across the Highlands who are doing incredible things, getting to pick up skills, different routes from university and college and other traditional
You're cutting college
schemes.
numbers, Emma.
But what is not going to help is looking at disabled young people and saying you're not allowed to have any support, because what is happening here and what is part of the proposals that we've just seen is that under 22s will not get incapacity benefits. Now these are disabled young people who cannot work, and that is unfair punishment. It is simply about cutting costs. I do not buy any of these lines that it is actually about supporting people into work, because the way to support disabled people into work is to give them the support that they need to do that.
OK, let me hear from the audience on this. Man in the front row.
What this man is saying is true, that they need to make cutbacks on things, but everything that this Labour government has done is hit the poor person that can't defend themselves. And that's through and through. They've not hit the big businesses where they could draw in more money.
OK, Zubir, I will come back to you. Let me just hear from some more people. Man in the end here, yes.
Yeah, and I think the effect on young people and children can't be underestimated here. There's always been young children and people with disabilities or reasons that they can't work and can't then go forward in education. I think one of the main issues now is that number is exponentially increasing as a result of the significant wealth inequalities and income inequalities across Scotland and the UK as a whole. Until you address that, you're not going to address the significant burden on the welfare state.
OK, thank you. Lady in the end here.
Yeah, I just want to echo kind of what this gentleman said before. Why is it always the poor and the most vulnerable that are hit in society? Why are we not, taxing the rich? The people that can generate a lot of income from there. But it's always the poor and the vulnerable.
And last, lady in the white here, yes.
Kind of an add-on to what the lady was saying at the other end. Why are we working from the bottom up rather than the top down? If you're putting appropriate legislation in for fair working amount, like wages, and you're putting in the appropriate things to help people who need the most help, then the trickle-on effect is that they will feel like they can come back to work, they will feel supported into work, and they will come back into work.
Thank you. Brian Whittle, do you support these changes? And look, lady's point, why is the government not working from the bottom up, and why haven't you done that in the past?
I think one of the things, that looking back over time is I don't think any government has got this kind of reform right at all. It's an extremely difficult thing. But we're working from a place, we have a problem. We have high levels of economic inactivity in Scotland. We have high levels of unemployment among disabled, higher than the rest of the UK. And quite frankly, the SNP budget on welfare is higher than it is in the rest of the UK, and they seem to wear that as a badge of honour. But the reality is that the reason why the welfare state is the way it is just now is because of failing in other portfolios like health and education. And I do think, the way the welfare state, it definitely needs reformed. We can't have the situation, those who really, really need that support, who can't work, need to get more than they currently do. And we do need to help those who, in time, will be capable of work back into work. And that includes disability. We did in committee, we looked at disability, unemployment. And the number of disabled people who want to work, who would be fantastic in their places, but yet can't seem to access work, is far too high. So we do need to reform the system. We do need to make sure that those who are in need get more than they currently do, and we need to reduce the number of people that are on welfare and get them back into work.
Let me go back to the audience. Man with the glasses. There, yes.
I work in the third sector, supporting young people into employment. I just wondered how that change is going to look. How are we going to get people from benefits and back into work? And my worry is that there's going to be a lot of extra pressure placed on the third sector to sort of help with that transition. How are we going to ensure that the third sector is supported properly to allow these transitions to happen?
OK. Brian?
Yeah. Can I just say, you've made a fantastic point. I think the third sector is a sector that's always the one that gets the squeeze. And actually, the third sector, the people at the front end who reach the people that are most unlikely, you know, the statutory service can't get to. And we keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And that just adds burden to the statutory services. We need to make sure that the third sector is properly integrated into statutory services and properly funded.
OK, thank you. Back to the question, Alan Taylor, is reducing benefits a fair solution to help the UK economy?
It's supposedly a way to help the UK economy, because apparently we have a 22 billion black hole, and this is going to help it to the tune of about 5 billion, we're told, at the moment. So we've got a long way to go to take cuts if there's another 17 billion somewhere in the wings waiting to come through. But I think what we need to do here is to make work much more attractive to people. People need to feel that they get up in the morning, they really want to go to work, they want to do something that's useful, they want to have fulfilled lives, they want to earn a living, they want to run their own affairs, they want to be in charge of their own affairs. And there's been a complete mind shift, it seems to me, in attitudes towards work.
Why is that? Why has that happened?
This is a very difficult thing, I think, to put your finger on, because when I worked in journalism and worked in newspapers, people turned up for the office around about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we had an editor who actually bought croissants and gave away free coffee to get people there early.
That was the Scotsman.
That was a Scotsman. But these guys would work from 8 till 8 at night, 10 o'clock at night, and then go to the pub and discuss what they were doing during the day. That has completely changed. People are clock watching, they leave at 5 on their hours, and they're not doing their fulfilled job, and they're not loving the job so that they want to spend longer in it than they normally would. It has to do perhaps with parental encouragement, perhaps to do with education, perhaps to do with the COVID crisis. Mental health issues have crept in as well. People are much more anxious for one reason or another.
Or maybe the type of jobs we have now in the economy.
Or maybe the type of jobs we have in the economy, because so many young people are going through university and getting high degrees and then finding that they're working in coffee shops pouring coffee. And that is not fulfilling, especially when they've been promised a better future by getting a very good degree.
OK, let me hear from the audience again. Man in the zip top, yeah.
Just want to bring up, you're saying that like people aren't finding work fulfilling. It's not that people don't find work fulfilling, it's work doesn't pay. I work in the NHS, I'm doing 30+ hours a week. I'm working shift work, I'm working weekends, I'm spending more time there than I do at home. But I'm not making anything near what someone works in Tesco. Like, why am I going in, pulling everything out to push back when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer?
And on this issue...
Good question.
On this issue of the benefit changes, when you heard what was being proposed by the government, what did you think?
I'm not someone that's ever claimed benefits, but my other half does. He's suffered with medical issues. He's currently on job seekers. He's looking for work, but every time that he gets into employment, there seems to be something that sticks to him. A reason for medical or whatever else that just push him back. There's not the support out there to keep people in employment when there is jobs. What can we do to work on that?
OK. Fiona Campbell.
I don't think anybody envies the UK Chancellor right now. There's clearly a lot of work to be done. There's fiscal challenges everywhere. But any reform that is done needs to be done fairly and compassionately. Any reform requires good policy and good legislation, and that needs to be data-driven, evidence-based, and make sure that there's no unintended consequences. Now, without wanting to be political, the Scottish Government doesn't have a particularly good track record with that. So in the sector that I represent, self-catering sector, 68% of our membership is reporting extreme or very high mental health impacts of the recent short-term let regulations. That's 68%, and that rises to 90% in Edinburgh. 70% of our membership are women. 60% of those women are over 55. Those women are having their businesses taken away from them because of the short-term let legislation. What are they to do? other to go on benefits. So it's a completely different cohort of people that are going to be impacted by... these people want to be working desperately, but they're having their businesses taken away from them. So how is that supporting getting people back to work?
West Streeting has said that in terms of mental health diagnosis, and that forms a significant part of the rise that we've seen in claims, that there has been over-diagnosis here in society. You're his private secretary. Do you agree with that?
So diagnosis is always something a specialist does, but I think what Wes was getting at is that there's been an unhelpful conflation between mental well-being and mental illness. And what we need to do is decouple both those things. We can't simply just add to the waiting list every single person with a mental health issue. There needs to be community support, community intervention, so these people never have to get into a situation they have to go to a hospital or to a clinic. And I think underlying all of this is some of the things that you've been talking about as an audience, the insecurity of work, the lack of work being able to pay. And that's why one of the first pieces of legislation as a Labour government that we came in to do was the Employment Rights Bill. So that gives everyone a real living wage, 200,000 Scots get a pay rise, the end of 0 hours contract, more security at work. That is the way out of this issue. And the other issue that's always been highlighted here is people being scared that the benefits are going to be taken away if they try work. So under the new proposals, which by the way are proposals that we want to co-create with everyone, and including all stakeholders, there will be a right to work without any prohibition on your benefits.
So are you saying people are confusing their mental well-being with mental illness?
Yeah. I don't think people are, but I think the system at times is unhelpful in conflating the two.
But who's diagnosing that then?
There are a number of people out there that are putting people onto waiting lists, which is not something, while they're on that waiting list, nothing is happening. No one's intervening. No one is helping.
Well, that's GPs that you're talking about.
No, it's not GPs. With respect, Stephen, it's not GPs. Because often the times GPs are overwhelmed. They're often the people not equipped to deal with these issues. And they're referring into a system that is just a chasm and a void where there are no structures, no pathways, and no support.
OK, let me just pick this up again with the audience. Man with the red glasses. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to kind of disagree with the overdiagnosis thing, because in order to get your benefits, you actually have to go through an independent assessment with the doctor. So this conflation is very dangerous, because mental well-being, you're saying there's a chasm, like a 2-year waiting period. I mean, I myself am in therapy. I have to pay for that therapy myself out of my own pocket, because you're right, it simply takes too long. Yep. But the reason it takes so long is because the system isn't built for it. And because of the shift, because of COVID, because of the increase in the mental awareness, it's all very performance, it's very surface level. I think if you really want to combat that, then you need to look at it and actually fix that issue before you get the claim that we're being overdiagnosed. Because if you're not fixing the root cause, which is actually trying to make that service better for people so they actually get the help they need, get it faster, so then you don't have them get to the point where they feel that they need to go on benefits because they're getting to the point where they can't even go outside anymore, feeling that anxiety, those issues. That needs to be looked at, and you can't just claim that. It's an overgeneralization, I think you're making.
OK, thank you, gentleman in the second row. It's over here. Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry to take the debate back just a little bit. I just wanted to reflect on Alan's comments about what I think is a toxic culture of presenteeism, is that you're there from 8 till 8 and then you go out for drinks. Technically with the boys, I've lived through that in previous occupations, and I think it creates a very toxic workplace culture when it's all about quantity, not quality. It's about, being seen to be there and being seen part of a group. And I just, having lived through that, when the longer you stayed at work, the higher you were regarded in terms of what you did. It wasn't about the quality you provided, it was about the quantity and time you spent at work, not about what you delivered. And I would not want to go back to that. And I think that's where the benefit of hybrid working at home and in the office comes into play, where we would give people that option to move away from these old toxic cultures of being seen to be there.
We hear you. And just let's finish with the man in the front row as well. Yeah.
I think we really should highlight the fact that the welfare benefit system in this country is absolutely amazing. I mean, really, when you think about it, the money we give to people in need who desperately need the money because they can't work for whatever reason, we need to highlight that. This is a very tricky way for Labour to go, I think, to suddenly pick on the groups of people that are going to be picking on, who are going to be sitting at home, worried about, are they going to make it? Are they going to manage next month, next year, whenever this comes in? I know it's coming in later on, but we really need to be mindful of what we're doing here. There must be other ways of this government raising money, because we spend a lot of money on a load of rubbish sometimes, and we need to. That's what we need to do. And let's not pick on the vulnerable.
OK, let's move on to other things that we spend our money on. Tonight, we are in Galashiels, then we're off for our Easter break. When we come back, we're going to be in Inverness, and after that, we're planning to do an NHS special coming up on debate night. So if you'd like to be in the audience for that show, or any of our forthcoming shows, you can go to the website, it's bbc.co.uk/debate night, and you can scan the QR code as well. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Ian Riley. Ian, good evening.
Good evening, panel. NHS England is being reinvented. Is it time for radical reform of the NHS in Scotland?
Thank you, Ian. The UK government announced last week NHS England is being scrapped to cut bureaucracy. Emma Roddick, here in Scotland, John Swinney has talked about modernising and renewing the NHS. Is that radical reform? Is that the plan?
He's not just talking about it, he is doing it. There is constant improvement processes going on in the NHS. I come from the NHS, that's what I did before politics, and I know that there are certain parts of the system that feel, even when you're working in them, quite bloated, and actually what you want when you're on the front line is just more people on the front line.
So how's that changing? What's he doing?
Over the next year, we've put a lot of money in the 2025-26 budget into increasing frontline staff, so training new GPs, dentists, looking at building the workforce up. What makes it very difficult is announcements from the UK government which look like they're very much going to cut the money that's available to the Scottish government.
Yeah, but here in Scotland, Audit Scotland have said you've got more staff than ever before, there's more spending than ever before, but you're seeing less patients than before COVID.
We need staff here in Scotland, and we have a very different geography in Scotland to other parts of the UK, and that has to be recognised in the way that NHS services are delivered. But already we are seeing the impact of this extra investment on waiting lists. I've just seen figures from across my region which show that we've seen far more people through ophthalmology, for elective surgeries, for cataracts. All of these issues are seeing much faster speed going through dealing with the appointments.
The plan is working as far as you're concerned. There is no need for radical reform.
Well, I think the changes that we've seen in the last few months have been significant. We don't know yet what the outcome is going to be of the NHS England changes. We don't know what the changes are going to mean for the budgets here, but I think having the staff available to get through these waiting lists in Scotland is a very good thing. And seeing those waiting lists reduce in the last few months, thanks to that extra investment, is fantastic.
OK, Zubir Ahmed, you've worked in the NHS north and south of the border. Do we need radical change here in Scotland to reflect what's happening with West treating south of the border?
We certainly do. And I can tell you my experiences of working in the National Health Service, and primarily in Scotland over the last 20 years, is that it's not a joyful place to work anymore. And it is because of top-down command and control structures, blurring of the lines of accountability. And these are all the things that were happening in NHS England. NHS England and the Department of Health had double the amount of staff that they did have in 2010 when we left as a Labour government with the highest satisfaction rates the NHS had ever seen. So the inputs going in are not producing the outputs the taxpayer expects. In Westminster, the Labour government is tackling this, is stopping duplication, is getting rid of that command and control structure, is devolving power to local regions, something that is an anathema to the SNP government in Holyrood. We need more of the same in Scotland. We need it urgently, otherwise the NHS we all love and appreciate will not be there very much longer.
Yeah, man on the end of the row here, the glasses. Yeah.
I'm an NHS doctor as well, so I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of what you've just said about the difficulties of the top-down approach and the waste in NHS. But I'd just like to challenge something you said initially, actually. You know, yes, the NHS in Scotland might have more staff now, but that's coming from a place of not having enough before. We still don't have enough compared to the population needs that are, you know, demanding of the NHS. And one of the key messages frontline staff have been saying for 20 years is we do not have enough staff. And radical reform or not, that's a message that is not yet getting across.
Do you think we need radical reform? You're on the front end of this here.
I am terrified by the phrase radical reform because that phrase has been used for so long and has come to nothing. Yes, we need something to change, but just saying radical reform isn't enough. Whereas what staff are actually saying is, we need more staff.
So when Wes Streeting, his boss, talks about the NHS in England being broken, how would you describe the NHS in Scotland? You work in it.
I love the NHS. You know, it is one of the, the best things the world has to offer for people and society as a whole. And it does amazing things. And I don't want to be disingenuous about that. It does amazing things. And we want it to do more and do better. I don't think it's broken, but I don't think we've been listening to the people that know what's going on and can help make the difference. And that is the frontline staff. Not management, not the execs, the frontline staff.
Brian Whittle.
Yeah, number one, what's happening down south can't happen up here because we have slightly different systems. I mean, my daughter works in the NHS, so I hear it firsthand. The reality is there's two things we need to deal with here, and it's related to the first question. One, despite whatever the SNP say about how much money they pour into the NHS, the outcomes are terrible. We are the unhealthiest nation in Europe and unhealthiest small country in the world. So we need to look at how we tackle that and how we stop people coming to need to come through the front door of the NHS. And secondly, and really boringly, although we had a great debate last week in Parliament, we need to actually reform the NHS by innovation and technology. We have a really, really poor ability to adopt innovation and technology. We are way behind the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom's way behind the rest of the world in this. It can revolutionise the way in which healthcare is delivered. And the thing you've got to look at here is what we're trying to solve. We're trying to give gentlemen like this the time to do their job. We need to deliver time. So, are we 1,000 doctors short? I'm not so sure. If we delivered a really good technology innovation platform, potentially we could give the gentlemen like this more time to deliver the job that they do. And at the moment, the system isn't working because, as I said, you can say we've got more staff than ever before, we can say we're putting more money in than ever before, but we remain at the top of the league in tables we don't want to be the top of the league of, and that hasn't tackled. And just one more point, I was going to say earlier on, I had met with the Royal Society of Psychiatrists this morning, and they were telling me things like there's an 800% increase in people being put in the system on a waiting list for the diagnosis of ADHD and conditions like that. 800% in 2 years. That is unbelievably unsustainable, and we have to tackle the reasons why that's happening in the first place.
OK, let me hear from the audience. Man in the hat. Yes.
First point is, can we please drop the radical change?
Yes.
All that's doing is scaring both the employees within the NHS and the patients who rely on the NHS. I think that is critical as well. And if we're looking for change, let it be patient-driven. Let's find out what the patients think they need. That's going to give it a lot more informed, grassroots view of what the patients actually want from the system.
Thank you. Lady in the white here. Yes.
I'm actually thinking what your gentleman here said about the things that he faces as a doctor, as somebody on the other end of things, needing multiple disciplinary involvements. I'm finding that it's so disjointed. So when I'm looking for referrals for my condition, I'm having to fight for every single referral. I have to make constant appointments with my GP, which is taking time that doesn't need to be taken. So there's no pathway for the condition I have specifically, but there are 1,000,001 different conditions. There should be some way of sort of amalgamating how these referrals go through so that instead of repeating different or having different departments working against each other or pushing the liability or the time that they want to spend about, because that's what ends up happening to the patient, is the patient's pushed from one department to another department, and it's not the fault of the doctor that's doing it. They have quotas to meet and they have timescales that they have to meet. But why is that not being looked at the way they actually fundamentally deal with those things?
Yeah, we can maybe talk a little bit about tech in just a second. Fiona Campbell.
I would just like to say that I have nothing but praise for the NHS, and I'd like to say thank you to everybody in the NHS in the audience today. Thank you for everything you do. My mother had a stroke recently, and I've got 2 very good friends going through cancer treatment, and they are being treated impeccably. But I absolutely echo the points about the term radical reform. It gives me the absolute fear. And it goes back to my answer on the first question, which is any reform requires data, evidence, and a really good policy objective. What is that reform trying to achieve? Which bit is broken? And until we understand what the policy objective is, and we do it sensibly and in a measured way, driven by the needs of the patient, driven by the needs of the staff, it's going to be done wrong.
We're all patients in this room. Man up in the very back row, yes.
The problem with the NHS is it's a victim of its own success. 20, 30, 40 years ago, people would have been dying. The treatments weren't there. The transplant surgeon there, no, 40 years ago, he wouldn't have been doing the things he's doing now. But there's people living now because of the success of the NHS. They're living longer. The NHS can do far more, so it's costing far more to do it. And this is a problem successive governments have known about for 50 years because the population's been getting older since the baby booms after the war. It's the same with pensions and everything like that. It's an ongoing thing that all governments have known about for many years.
Thank you. Ageing population, more complex medical needs. Is it time for radical reform in Scotland?
Well, again, I don't like the word radical because I'm fearful of what that actually means. You know, radical is what Donald Trump gives you. But I think you do need some kind of major reform. I mean, I've recently had experience of the National Health Service, quite a serious operation. And I went from practice nurses to other staff in the hospitals and all the rest of it, to surgeons. The one person I never met, never saw, was a GP. And I think many people here would say the same. If they tried to get in touch with a GP, they'd find it rather difficult. But there are ways one can look at the health service and ask difficult questions. And could they work? For example, do doctors need to train for as long as they do need to train for at the moment? Can we retain foreign doctors who come here and train for a while and then immediately go back to their home countries? We should be looking at keeping them here. And then on top of everything else, what we really need to look at is the way we treat ourselves, the way we actually behave, what we eat, the exercise we take.
Personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility. That is a very big issue. And finally, the last thing I'd say is, and one of the things I hear a lot from people who work in the NHS is that the patients, the public, many of them have a sense of entitlement. They seem to expect things to go into gear the minute they ask for it. And I think that is unreasonable. And people need to really rethink that, and they need to think again about themselves and their own personal responsibility.
On the issue of tech, Emma Roddick, why don't we have an NHS app in Scotland? They've had one in England for 6 years. Most other countries have one. Why don't we have one?
So I understand it's being worked on. I suppose it's up to then, what do people actually want from the app? I mean, for me, I'd prefer appointments and phone calls to an app. I think the NHS Inform website that we have is fantastic for answering most questions that people have, and that's got a mobile version that's fantastic. But I did just want to pick up on your point. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. But on pathways, this is something that is being talked about. I know because I've spoken to the Minister for Public Health about this, had a very similar experience to you, just being bounced about different specialties, and there's not that connection. So it is something that I'm speaking with MS, ME, EDS campaigners about to make sure that there is that conversation, because we are wasting doctors' time by telling them the same story over and over and over.
OK, let me hear from audience on the back row. There's a few people. Yes, lady there, on you go.
I just wanted to thank Brian for providing such a clear view of how the Conservative Party might deal with things, because the doctor at the front was very clear that they need more doctors, and your response was to come up with tech and effectively cut people out of jobs.
OK, hang on. And other lady on the back row with the grey hair. Yes, on you go. Yes.
Yes. In Scotland at the moment, there are hundreds of innocent men in jail. We have paid out £50 million to potential accusers for that. But when these men are in jail, they're having to wait months and months.
Is this a question about the NHS?
Yes.
OK,
it's basically to say, why are these men in jail having to wait months on NHS help within the jail, having to wait months, 9 months for a dental appointment, a year and a half for an audiology appointment.
OK, and let me just take it back to the gentleman with the glasses right in the middle here. Yes, on you go.
That me?
Yes.
Yeah, I asked the question. Obviously, I put radical in to make it more silly. more get caught as a question. I think the chances of the Labour government doing radical change is now because they're early in the Parliament. SNP aren't going to do it because we're near an election, so the chances of them coming up with anything major isn't high because no one wants to touch the NHS.
Well, we talk about it a lot, and as I say, we're going to do an NHS special, hopefully, next month on the programme, because I know it's a topic that you want to talk about a lot on debate night. The hashtag for everything we talk about tonight is hashtag BBCDN. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Peter Sanderson. Peter, good evening.
Good evening, panel. Does the current funding crisis at Dundee University indicate that it's time to reconsider funding arrangements for higher education?
Thank you, Peter. Last week, Dundee announced 600 job cuts amidst a funding crisis. Today, MSPs were told at Holyrood that Dundee is just weeks away from running out of money on this. Alan Taylor, is it time to look again at the funding model for higher education? We're in the Borders College here tonight. Challenges down here around finance as well.
Well, Dundee's not alone, of course. You know, across the university sector, we hear that universities are struggling. Aberdeen was struggling. Edinburgh University's struggling. And I think there has been, of course, an explosion of numbers of people going to university. When I lived in Glasgow, in the Merchant City part of Glasgow, we seemed to be surrounded by students, and bigger student blocks and buildings and accommodations were going up all the time. And, you know, my conclusion really of that is that far too many people are going to university and society can't cope with it. Certainly society can't cope with paying for all these people to go to university and the staff that they have. I do think, though, that there is a case that says that in certain areas, university staffs are bloated. I'm astonished, for example, by the communications people that are in universities and marketing people, and I think that needs to be looked at. And I think also the numbers of students that we require to come from foreign countries to be here and to pay for the universities to provide free tuition in Scotland needs also to be looked at.
They've become businesses, basically,
they basically are businesses, and it's very difficult for some people to justify the degrees that these people get. Chinese students, a huge population of Chinese students at Edinburgh University, many of whom, by the way, who speak very, very, very little English. And that needs to be looked at too. There are bigger political questions involved with that as well, I must say.
Brian Whittle, is this a wake-up call, what's happening in Dundee at the moment for further education in Scotland, and do we need to change the funding model?
I mean, if it's a wake-up call, then nobody's been listening, because this has been happening on the slope for an awful long time. We do need to look at the way in which we deliver education. The last budget we should ever cut is education. It is the cornerstone of every portfolio that we do. But I do agree in terms of the way in which universities are funded. We have to look at that because you know, the way in which it's funded is creating a cap on the number of Scottish students that can go to Scottish universities. There's a rise of 84% of Scottish applicants who are being denied going to Scottish universities. So we do need to do that. There's a disparity between the way in which universities are funded and the way colleges are funded, because I think colleges at the moment are really scrapping to keep their head above water, and they actually can deliver much of the jobs of the future that we need in terms of apprenticeships, in terms of engineering, because we're really short of that. So we do need to look at the way in which our education is funded. What we do need to do is ensure that no matter where you come from and who you are, you have access to first-class education.
Well, you've suggested that children could leave school as early as 14 to go into further education.
I think you'll find I haven't.
The Scottish Conservatives
have.
No,
they didn't. What the Scottish Conservatives did was start a conversation that said, how do we get a hold of the increasing numbers of kids that are disenfranchised at school, who are not attending school at the moment, and how do we create an environment where we can keep them in education? Not send them up chimneys around that.
But you suggested coming out of school and going into further education at the age of 14.
This is already happening, by the way. This is not a new In my own area, for example, my eldest daughter, who happens to be a teacher and head of guidance at one of the schools, is working with a third sector organisation who take the children who don't go to school there into the third sector organisation, who are funded to deliver IT skills and qualifications. And it's not about it's not about taking them out of school to go to work. It's about how do we start a conversation about preventing kids falling out of education at a young age, because that's a scenario it's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger problem, and we need to have that conversation.
Yeah, well, we talked about 1 in 6 of young Scots, a man on the end.
Having been in education myself, I speak on behalf of Elmwood College, and with Elmwood College, they have done, well, SIUC have done nothing but invest in Edinburgh campus and everywhere else, but yet the Conservatives have done nothing. The Conservatives have done nothing since they only think about their own pockets and the fact that they are not investing in future education. But why is that?
Fiona Campbell, I think your son's just been accepted by Glasgow University, hasn't he? Just this week.
Very exciting, very exciting.
Yep.
I think that one of the issues, and there is a growing issue across the whole of Scotland, higher education institutions, I think, have been reliant on international students for too long. I think they've been sort of seen as a bit of a cash cow. Would I like a funding methodology to change so that we have to pay for tuition as a mother of 6? No, clearly not. That's the reality. But I absolutely understand there are difficult decisions to be made. My concern about if you start making Scots pay for their higher education, will they be put off from doing that? And if we are trying to deliver an economy based on skills and business growth, is that the right thing to do? So again, it comes back to, if you decide to start charging them for tuition, what's that going to look like on the other side? And I think we've got to look further into the future to make sure that we might make the right decisions.
Emma Roddick, the SNP have repeatedly said they will never bring back tuition fees. But is there a different way of funding higher education? Because clearly it's not working in Scotland at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a conversation that needs to be had. And, you know, we've just given further education more money in the current budget, but that's not going to be sustainable forever, and you need to look at why it's costing so much. But for me, I mean, it goes back to what Fiona's just said. The principle that we keep coming back to is free tuition. Now, Labour, before the election, before they got into government, seemed to think that tuition should be cheaper in England, but since coming in have raised it. So we're the only ones who are being consistent on that principle, that going to university should be based on your ability to learn, not your ability to pay.
But it's not working if universities are almost going under financially, is it?
Some will go under.
Well, it's working in that people are able to access further education who would not have been able to access it otherwise. Now, making it sustainable is something that we have to do. That's a challenge that we're facing right now. But going back to charging people for going to university is not the answer, and it's not an answer that the SNP is ever going to be comfortable with.
Zubir Ahmed?
Well, the Scottish Labour Party is quite clear that we will not charge tuition fees in Scotland. But this isn't about inputs, it's about outputs. It's about having a strategy that gives you a workforce that's skilled, whether it goes to university, to further education, or to graduate apprenticeships. I think there needs to be a lot more parity of esteem between the three. I think Scottish students need to be prioritised in Scottish institutions. At the moment, we are bleeding too much talent out of this country because they can't get university places. In some cases, they get into university. I have a constituent of mine who's doing a paramedic degree in Glasgow who's unable to then secure a job in Scotland as a paramedic. There's so many of those people in the same boat as her that Bristol has set up a special application process for Scottish trained paramedics to go down to Bristol to get jobs. So we're hemorrhaging talent at a rapid speed, and we need a real reaccount of how we deliver skills and jobs in Scotland.
Let me hear from the lady on the end, the short here. Yes.
Given the fact that the whole of society and British industry in particular should be benefiting from these degrees, would it not be fair that industry sponsors some university departments?
Well, it does.
They do.
It does.
They do.
It does.
Yeah.
And younger man here in the second row, yeah. Maybe a student?
Yeah, I'm a student. You say Scottish Labour won't
ever charge for tuition fees, but you said in the general election that in England they wouldn't increase tuition fees. However, they have, so why should we listen to a word you say?
The Scottish Labour Party, through the devolution settlement, have said we will not charge tuition fees. It was the Scottish Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat coalition, by the way, that ended tuition fees in Scotland. In England, the tuition fees have gone up with the rate of inflation, not in real terms.
Thank you, thank you. Your views on all of this, as always, from home, hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We've got one more question this evening. It's from Callum Stewart. Callum, where are you this evening? Good evening.
Have any of the panel ever encouraged their family to join the armed forces? And where do they expect our forces people of the future to come from?
Callum, you're ex-armed forces yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
13 years in the army.
Anyone else in the family contemplating
it? Well, yes, my brother in the reserves.
OK.
Yeah.
So the armed forces numbers in the UK at their lowest level since Napoleonic times, actually. The Chief of the UK Defence Staff says we need to boost defence and prepare for war in these uncertain times. Where do we expect our forces of the future to come from? Fiona Campbell.
My grandfather was in the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. My father was in the Gordon Highlanders, and my brother was in the Honourable Artillery Company. So, as a family, I think we have.
You've done your bit.
We've done a bit. Would I like any of my children, male or female, to go into the army? I would absolutely support them if that was right for them. It's an incredibly honourable profession, defending the country. Amazing, fantastic. But would I ever support that being mandatory and the reintroduction of national service? Absolutely not, because some of my kids it would not fit for. So I think it is to be encouraged. I would support. And yes, I totally appreciate the challenges afoot.
1 in 10 members of Generation Z told The Times in a survey recently, only 1 in 10 would be prepared to fight for their country. Alan Taylor, would you encourage members of your family to join the armed forces?
Well, the most dangerous thing I've ever done was interview Jackie Collins. And I would encourage anybody in my family to join the armed forces as long as there wasn't going to be any war or fighting. Because I think they can do remarkable things in the armed forces. They've got a way of organising things. They've got a way of making things happen that other aspects of society don't. And I'd be very happy for any member of my family to be in any of the forces as long as they weren't going to get hurt. The problem we face now is it's a very febrile world. And I think that we can see what's happening in America. We don't have the friends there that we used to have. We have to think much more strongly about our own defence and how we're going to manage that. And I think that's a conversation that others are going to have that are in power that I don't want to have. But
is that putting people off? I mean, areas like the borders used to be a really strong recruiting area for the armed forces in the UK. Has something changed?
Well, I think it did change. I think that people don't want to go to war. They don't want the possibility of being killed. It's quite simple. I think.
But they've never wanted that.
They've never wanted that. But we've had a very, very long period of peace. We've had 70-plus years of peace. I never thought I'd ever see a war in Europe again in my lifetime. I can hardly believe what's happening right now. But we live in times that are very, very, very unpredictable.
Lady with the glasses, up there. Yes.
Speaking as a member of Gen Z, I would say there's not the same pride in your country as there perhaps was at the time of the Second World War. And I would fight for Scotland, but not the United Kingdom. Because I don't feel proud to be a British person, and I think it's a lot to do with the pride you have for your country.
And why is that?
I just feel the country's been going downhill a lot. We used to be one of the utmost nations in the world, and now we're a laughingstock. And I just feel I feel really disappointed in the country in general.
Okay, okay, and lady behind you, your hand shot up there.
So for me, basically, I just think that it doesn't really come down to pride in the country. Do you not think it's got a lot to do with maybe our troops getting sent places that perhaps they shouldn't have been? Do you not think it's perhaps that our soldiers aren't looked after and given the respect at the road when they come home, when they are? So I don't think it's about pride in the country, in our country where we live. I think the soldiers are doing an incredible job. They should be supported, they should be looked after for life, in my opinion. And I feel like our wars should be proportionate in relation to the UK. And I don't feel that we should be getting dragged into wars that our boys don't need to be in. And I think if that was the case, you'd probably find it would be more attractive to a lot of young people.
Thank you, thank you. And man in the middle in the best jacket we've ever had, ever on debate night.
Thank you very much. I feel that there's a theme in this question that's represented in the previous three questions as well, which is the conflation of economy and principles. For each of those questions we've had prior and for this question, what's the principle behind this? Like, why would we love our country? Where is the community in that? Where is the neighbour that you know that you want to protect, or your loved ones you want to protect? And instead, why are we sending people to other places? What was the motivation behind that, if not economic?
And that's what's driven this. Brian Whittle.
Well, I think as someone who was heading towards the Air Force at one point before sport got in the way, as I said, I'm immensely proud of what our armed forces do.
Would you encourage family members to join?
If that's what they wanted to do, I absolutely would encourage them to do that. If that's what they came to me, they said they wanted to. I wouldn't, you know, put it in front.
Suggest it. I
wouldn't suggest it. It's very much up to them. But we live in a world that's completely different now than it was 10 years ago. We've lived in a period of time when we've had, you know, extended peace after the Cold War. Never thought I'd ever see a war in Europe again, and now we have. And I heard today that France is sending out a pamphlet to every single person to tell them how to live through a war by the summer. That's the consideration that is at the moment. So somewhere or other, you know, the number one rule of government is to defend your country, and somewhere or other we're going to have to find a way to do that. But to the lady's question up there, I do think we've been too quick to jump into other people's wars. And I think that in itself has probably dissuaded a number of people who would have joined the armed forces, who want to who would feel pride in protecting our country from doing so.
Emma Roddick.
Well, I'm Gen Z as well, and absolutely I remember as a wee kid hearing about Iraq and the decisions that were made there, and we still talk about that all the time in this country, and how we were led into that war, and how that really shaped actually a lot of our generation's political views. I think it's undeniable that we're facing existential threats to us at the moment, but we need to actually look at where those are coming from and what the effective way to tackle them is. Because yes, we will need recruitment in the traditional sense, but I think we need to be really aware of how other wars across the world at the moment are playing out, and how much it relies on cybersecurity and other technological advancements, and how actually wars can now be fought and won through the use of techniques like AI, disinformation, misinformation.
Well, on the front line, Zubir Ahmed.
I'd be proud for any member of my family to be a member of the armed forces, and thank you for your service. And of course, we're having this conversation at a point of inflection point in the defence of the European continent. President Zelensky is holding the line between darkness and light, between democracy and imperialism. And we, as a country, need to cooperate with our European partners. And I'm so thankful we have a Prime Minister that's taken leadership in this role, that's brought together the powers of Europe to realise that we need to invest in the defence of our country like never before. We need to attain energy security. And these are the things that the SNP have not got a clear answer on, but we have got a clear answer on. We will invest in the defence of this country, both online threats and physical threats. We will invest in energy security so we can get Putin's boot off our necks.
So
that is
why
the
are
way out of this
recruitment
situation.
numbers so long? Is it because we got involved in wars that we shouldn't have got involved in?
I think these things become cyclical. I think at one point the government was trying to reduce army numbers, which hasn't been particularly helpful. I think we forgot the covenant that we have with the armed forces, that they go out and risk their lives for us, and that we look after them to the best of our ability. I think that was lost on a generation of soldiers, and that is to the shame of our previous governments. I think we are re-energising and rediscovering that covenant now. And I think we absolutely need an army to defend our country, and that's why we should all be encouraging people to join the army.
Callum, you asked the question. What do you think about what you've heard from the panel this evening?
You can't get away from the fact that you need an armed forces. It costs and it's expensive, and we've cut away at that. Yeah. That's had an effect on recruitment. The first question this evening was 1 in 6 young Scots isn't in employment. I don't want to be the recruitment arm of the armed forces, but 1 in 6 is not in employment. We're talking about education. The education you get as a young person in the military is phenomenal. Okay, so when we talk about should we be encouraging our young people to serve, because that's what it is, it's service. I can't think of a better institution to be pointing our young people to right now. We just need to point them, and then when we do, there's got to be something for them to look at that's worth looking at. Because right now, they get adverts on the television where someone's sat there playing a Game Boy, you know, playing a controller, and that's not life in the military. And sorry, last point. War, when you're in the military, war is like 1% of your career in the military. It really is. And you're trained for it, and you're doing it with your comrades. It isn't this terrifying, horrible, you know, experience that you're desperately trying to avoid. That's not it. When you join the military, you will find that actually there's a job you've been trained to do and you're proud to do it.
You sure you don't work in recruitment?
I work in sales, but there you go.
Almost the same thing. Lady with the glasses, yeah.
It's interesting that everyone has mentioned Europe's at war, but it's not just Europe. There's a huge genocide going on. So why should anyone in this country want to go and fight for that? Like, why would anyone want to be involved in that? What is the UK doing to help that? You know, who wants to be complicit?
All right, a man on the front row down here in the black sweater.
We have such a proud history in this country of serving in the military, and we should be thankful for all that they've done over the generations from whenever time began. Our history is based on the Navy and the Army and the Royal Air Force. And while we know that war is never the best way to deal with situations, we are in a state right now, we are in peril of World War III. There's no question that that is likely to happen if we don't watch out. Sadly, we've got a man over in America at the moment who, quite frankly, we should be completely petrified about. He is quite a driven man, and we should be very careful what he might do. So in this country, we need to stand up against him. We need to stand with Zelensky, not Putin. We need to stand with Zelensky.
And we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared for all things.
We have to be prepared, and therefore we will need more military to support that, sadly, and that may mean calling on other people.
OK, we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for that, though. And that's it for this evening. We're off now for Easter, but back with you on the 23rd of April for a new series, starting in Inverness and then travelling around the country. Have a look at our website if you want to come along and join us. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated a bit later on BBC One Scotland, or you can watch it any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our brilliant audience here in Galashiels, and of course to you at home for watching wherever you are in Scotland. We'll see you next month. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.